Daredevil by Frank Miller and Klaus Janson, the Omnibus. I got jealous of seeing everyone buying the new edition of the Omnibus, and I thought, I want to revisit that world as well. And so I picked it back up and started rereading my slightly older version of the Omnibus with a different dust jacket. But we'll get into the build of the book in general, because this book is a seminal piece of work in many, many respects, and it is a super important book in many respects because it defined Daredevil as a character in a new way that is still really felt today, to be honest. And even though this omnibus is a kind of seminal piece of work, it starts out awfully. I feel sorry for people who have to kind of dip into this book fresh as a daisy and never read any Daredevil before, because there's some seriously ropey issues at the start of this book. Frank Miller takes over writing, or at least certain writing duties, from issue 165 right until the end of the run, which is 191. And so the whole collection here takes 158 Daredevil up to 191 Daredevil, with a few little extras here and there and a few annuals here and there, I think. Nothing major, that's basically the broad strokes of it, I think. He didn't write all of the early issues. He wrote some of them, so he's not excused from it, but some of the writing on all the issues from 158 to 167 they're painful to read. They really are painful. The best use of these issues at the beginning that I can find is basically skipping them, going to 168, which is page 172, and then reading all of the omnibus, and then going back to the beginning, and they will give you such an appreciation of the sea change in creativity, writing, art, everything that Frank Miller ushered in with Klaus Janson, because it is mind-blowing. The change from one issue to the next is insane, I think. Literally all of those issues, the only good thing about them is the art. You know, he meets up with the Hulk, he does some stuff with the Black Widow, and yeah, shocker, what would happen if the Hulk met Daredevil? Well, Daredevil would obviously end up hospitalised. Yeah, he ends up hospitalised. Obviously that was going to happen. But then there's a perler of a bad issue with the Mauler, which is by David Michelini, or Michelini, however you pronounce it, the guy who wrote Spider-Man for many, many years. He writes an issue, and wow, that is real bad. It's basically about an old man whose identity gets lost, and a computer kind of loses his identity and all that, and his boss doesn't pay out certain things he's owned, and so he steals this suit to get revenge on his boss. And the way he gets revenge is by stealing his boss's wallet and setting fire to his credit cards. Either way, I genuinely mean it, is that if I were you, I would just skip them all. There's really no need for them at all. I'm not being nasty, but there is literally no redeeming qualities to those stories whatsoever, I think. But then, when you get to that sea change, when you get to page 172 and you start with issue 168, wowza. Instantly, as soon as you turn the page, the art is different. It's more kind of atmospheric, it's more emotional, it's rainy. The approach to the writing has changed as well. Daredevil before was talking in a really jarring way, and because there was multiple writers over such a small set of issues, you know, Frank Miller being one of them, but David Michelini and then other writers over like 8 or so issues, his voice was all over the place. But here, his voice was kind of clean and straight, and you understood exactly kind of what type of character he was by reading his dialogue and reading his internal monologue and all that. And that would stay true right until the end of the run. So there was far more consistency in his character. And equally, it was just tinged with noir overtones. You know, his character comes across instantly as this kind of strong, swashbuckling, kind of almost like a detective in a film noir picture. One of the early issues, actually, Miller goes out of his way to show a film theatre, and inside the film theatre they're playing the Maltese Falcon, and they're discussing, you know, how amazing the noir film is, and using kind of scenes from that. I mean, literally, he's wearing his inspirations on his sleeve right from the very early issues of this run. He wanted to kind of get that gritty, detective, action-packed New York noir vibe going on, and he got that so right. And honestly now, those issues, if you do read them and then you go into 168, you will notice straight away, because it is unavoidable. You can't not notice it, how quick the change in creativity, in clarity is, and it is beautiful. So if anything, yeah, that's what you should read the first opening issues for, is to give you a better appreciation of what's to come. Straight away, Elektra's introduced. And if you are making a tally of Daredevil tropes and Daredevil characters that are introduced in this run that still continue today, you could add to them the introduction of Elektra. The fact that they made Bullseye into a credible, disturbing, maniacal bad guy, which was not easy to do. It was not easy to do, but they did it really, really well. They brought Kingpin in as one of the main kind of gang lord bosses who was exclusively used in Spider-Man previously. The Punisher first came into Daredevil's world in this run. The Hand, the people that trained Elektra, that mystical ninja force came in here. Stick, his mentor that trained him in the arts of kind of, you know, honing his skill and his craft and his power, was introduced here. And honestly, I could go on and on and on. This is probably the most definitive Daredevil run that has ever been put to paper. No one has introduced more things, character-based, more ideas, more plot lines, more atmosphere, more everything. The stuck. And it would be easy for me to say, oh yeah, this person has done some creative stuff, but then when the next person comes in on a run, all that goes away. But every subsequent Daredevil writer has taken from this fountain that Miller and Janson created here, because it is so rich with creativity and intriguing plots. And don't get me wrong, it's not faultless by any stretch. There are a few duff issues and a few characters that are worse than others, but in general, the imaginative way that they've approached this character and the defining traits they give this character going forward was phenomenal. And it is definitely through the Miller run that I became a Daredevil fan. The first Daredevil book that I properly read and appreciated was Born Again, where Daredevil gets ripped to pieces by the Kingpin. And once I read that, I went back to all these stories and back to the original run and loved it, because, again, they introduce Bullseye, they bring in him, he gets defeated by Daredevil time and time again, and then he ends up in hospital and he has a brain tumour. He escapes because he's having these chronic headaches, and all around him on the street, because of the brain tumour and because of the trauma that he's been through, being beaten, all he sees on the streets around him are Daredevil. So every human being walking the streets of New York is Daredevil to him. So he starts just beating up random people all over the place and killing them as well. Bullseye previous was not that type of character at all. This was a sea change for that character, and instantly he was on the edge, he was maniacal. And the fact that Elektra comes in as his first love, while he's trying to build a new life with another woman, and while he's kind of going off, and she is so opposite to everything he stands for. She's a ruthless assassin, and he is a man who follows the letter of the law and brings people to justice. But he can't match those two things up, but equally he can't put aside his feelings. And so that clash of characters and that friction between the two is played out beautifully. The Kingpin, this big, lumbering, astoundingly gigantic presence looming over the city, is an obstacle that Daredevil just can't overcome, but he has to overcome him. And yet, everything that is outlined here is just so good, I think. It is definitely up there with one of my favourites, if not my favourite superhero comic book run, really. Daredevil by Mark Waid and Chris Samney is my favourite Daredevil run, really. But this, for pure innovation, creativity, advancement of the world, the character, the genre of superhero is amazing, I think. The mysticism he brings in as well with the hand, and how they kind of almost use mystical ancient techniques to keep on living or dissolve their bodies when they get killed, all these different things. All of that's great, because Daredevil is this kind of noir, ground, street level character, and now all of a sudden, alongside dealing with crazy Bullseye, Elektra being assassin, and Kingpin, now he's got these mysterious ninja forces that are untold in numbers, attacking him for different reasons and making his city hell. He's so arrogant, and the man without fear cannot show that vulnerability or that fear, that he just meets everything head on. And his characterization is plotted in a really intriguing way, I think, because things happen that have a deep impact on his mental state, but because he sees himself as this man without fear, can't show vulnerability, can't be weak, has to push forward, that he pushes everything down, he represses it all, and it comes out as him acting erratically or doing weird things. But again, it just goes together to make this amazing look at Daredevil, to see him warts and all. I love it when the issues flip the narrator as well, giving another different voice, because you go through it and, like typical superhero books, there's heavy inner monologue going on. But Daredevil run was one of the first runs that I remember reading, really, that give that internal monologue to other characters coming in, like Ben Urich, the investigator. There's an entire issue where you see it from his point of view and his narration, and then Daredevil is coming in at random, but you never hear what Daredevil is thinking as you would in a normal issue, because this is Ben's issue. And you get the same with Elektra, and an exceptional one you get with Bullseye, because you get fully into the mindset of Bullseye by listening to what he's thinking about and how much he despises and hates Daredevil and wants revenge at all costs. And so, yeah, the way that they kind of play with our narrative is great. And so the way that it's written and formatted and not afraid to experiment and try new things is fabulous, I think. The artwork, obviously, as you might imagine, Frank Miller in the 80s is phenomenal, really. Again, Klaus Janson needs a lot of credit for this, because the inking, when you look at Frank Miller's pencils and look at the inking, there are differences. And there is a very kind of symbiotic relationship going on between the two. And so you can't really pull the artwork apart and give it to one person in this run. It very much is a joint effort right the way through, with Klaus Janson even taking over whole issues at some point, really. But certainly it's got a very heavy Frank Miller feel to it, as you would expect, with him doing the main pencils for the entire run. At the back as well of the omnibus, you get a mental long interview by Miller and Klaus Janson that was done back in the day, really. And this is a great interview. I really enjoyed reading that. It's full of really interesting approaches to how they made the story and how they come up with it and everything like that. There's also a little what if issue at the end. What if Matt Murdock was an agent of steel? But for the most part, from that 168 issue forward, it is one of the most fun and interesting superhero story arcs that you're going to get. Not perfect, I can't say that it's perfect, because there are a few little points where it dips down in quality, but in general, what a ride. And the thing that I keep coming back to whenever I talk about books on this channel all the time is that I really appreciate it when people have ideas and follow them through and come up with new concepts, that they don't just do the same thing over and over. And this is a perfect example of that. They could have easily just taken over Daredevil, just gone forward with the standard status quo that Daredevil existed before. But no, they wanted to throw something new, do something new and innovative with the character. And so even when the dialogue drops or a character comes in that I don't much like, I'm still in for the ride, because I absolutely love the imagination going on and the firing on all cylinders of creativity that comes across. It is a Marvel Omnibus size, which is the same size as your deluxe edition, and the edition that came out the other day doesn't have this same dust jacket, but I believe it's the same under the board, so the same kind of artwork on the boards. It is sewn binding, glossy pages throughout, and it is around about 800 or so pages, I think, if memory serves. I'll have a look at the contents for you. Entertain yourself for a sec. 754 pages, and at least 171 of those pages, and not the best, but then the rest, I can't do the math, are phenomenal. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.